now the second session in a series of a minimum 6, but it could be much longer as we're getting requests and questions about going deeper into issues. So first thing that I want to start off with is thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us here and participate. And then the second thing I want to do is if you have any topics that we don't cover or you'd like us to go a little deeper on, feel free to email us. We're happy to do it here. So I'll go ahead and share my screen now and get us started here. Give me 1 second here. All right. Of course, what Zoom meeting would be a Zoom meeting without some kind of technical error here. All right, so here we are. So this is Election Essentials, training advocates to impact elections. Again, we can't thank you enough for participating in this. We're hoping that this comes as not only a learning lesson, but I see a lot of people here who have electoral experience. What we're really hoping to do is to just share best practices, but also reinforce some of the things that sometimes we forget because we're incredibly busy when we're doing candidate vetting, endorsement processes. So we want to make sure that we're sharing some of the best practices that should be fundamental. And also, again, we're not the end all be all of knowledge when it comes to elections. So if you folks have any comments or questions or anything we've missed, please feel free to share it with us. Jonathan, I'll let you share a little bit about Election Essentials.
Absolutely. So Christian and I have the opportunity to interact with people all over the country. We love talking about how to be impactful in elections, and we love seeing advocates move from traditional issue advocates into election advocates. And so we started this webinar as a way to train folks who are interested. It's nonpartisan, non-issue based. We're open to anyone and everyone who wants to learn about how to be a more effective electoral advocate. Like Christian said, we're going to focus on some of the fundamental topics, some news and insights that's going on and how you can apply them. And then also, some humility. We've learned from a lot of great people out there. We know people that are listening in, folks that we work with have great ideas as well. There's a lot to these topics and some nuance too. We're just going to let you know what's on our mind, but we're always open to feedback and pushback. Feel free to comment and give us thoughts on how you see some of these things. And Christian, why don't you take them through where we are in our schedule so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are the first 6 weeks that we came up with. And when you think of essentials, typically people think this is fundamentals or 101. But the way I really view this is if you're able to incorporate these 6 weeks learnings into your organization, whether you're figuring out how to scale your C4 or you're learning how to build out a political arm of your advocacy organization, if you take these to heart, what you'll be able to do is essentially be a powerhouse, a political powerhouse within your county, your state, your region. And so we have 6 of them. We're in week 2. Today we're going to learn about how to become politically viable, how to know if a candidate is viable and whether or not you should get involved in their race. And then last week, if you missed it, if you weren't here, we have it up on YouTube. So feel free to go check it out. It's to learn how to find out if a candidate is on your issue or not, or right on side on your issue. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to learn a lot of things. We're going to learn about budgeting. We're going to learn about different tactics, how effective and ineffective they are. We're going to learn the kind of questions you'd be asking a lawyer when you're getting involved in an election. And my personal favorite, how to read a poll, how to read and write a poll. So much of polling is fundamental to elections. And I'm going to be a geek when we get to that week.
Here, Christian pulls out every aspect of his life. It's very well planned out, right?
Yeah, I do. So just a little bit about us. We won't go on, but my name is Christian Esperias. I'm the National Director of Campaign Strategy for Our Turn Action Network, formerly Students for Education Reform. I've been in the advocacy and electoral work for the last decade. I started my career as a community organizer, organizing house meetings and one-on-ones, things that are still very fundamental to the way I view politics. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to participate in coordinated races, independent expenditures, everything from federal all the way down to school board, where Our Turn really puts its focus on is electing leaders of education equity to make sure that our young people are represented at elected positions.
So Christian, our question sort of off Personal question for the week: what's one person that you would go dinner? What would one political person you'd like to go to dinner with?
Yeah, this is a tough question because I wish I had a more original answer. I would give myself like a really bad grade just based on this answer, and it's President Obama. I wish I had someone more exciting, but I think it'd be a good dinner guest because one, I would love like a peek behind the veil to learn how the sausage was made in the White House, why things failed, who's to blame, who's to credit. But also, it can get boring and tiring just talking about politics all day. So someone to talk about basketball with, which I'm a huge basketball fan, would be fun. And also, he has a lot of passion projects now that he's out of office and running a foundation and doing these things. So we can talk about movies now that he's a hotshot Oscar-winning executive producer. So that would be my guess. But I'm going to turn the question to you, Jonathan. Tell us a little about yourself, but also maybe start with your dinner guest. Who's your dinner guest?
So my dinner guest is my dinner guest is probably the exact opposite in a lot of ways, because in college my political science classes were more philosophy than practical politics, and my favorite author from that time period or from reading political philosophy was Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, a famous book about a young Frenchman who comes to the United States and observes Americans and makes comments about how he sees society, how he sees it going, and just some amazing insights for someone that it was much younger than I am now. And I'm just would be fascinated to pick his brain about how he views Americans and our sensibilities and how we approach politics. There's some eye-opening stuff in that book. So that's who I would have as my dinner guest.
And tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right. So I'm the senior vice president at 50 CAN. I've spent 18 years in elections and advocacy. I'm also a local elected official in my hometown of Kearney, Nebraska, where we are just big, really enjoy that. I really enjoy serving my community. Worked on pretty much all levels of election races. And I have written a book called The 50 CAN Guide to Political Advocacy that you can find on our website. Just a really basic primer that takes you from start to finish if you're an issue-based group and you want to know how to engage in politics. And a lot of what I'm talking about here are things that I pulled from that book when I wrote it. Anyway, if you go to our website, you can purchase it or download a free PDF.
Jonathan's being incredibly modest. This all came about because of this book that he wrote, and I can't praise it enough. In our world of campaign, operatives, most of our history is verbally shared and learned by shadowing someone. And this is the first time I've seen such a comprehensive, history of it and how to. So everything that you're going to learn today in the next coming weeks, it's all due to Jonathan's hard work in this amazing book. So if you haven't downloaded yet, please do. If you ever need a forward, Jonathan, I'm happy to write it for you.
Volume 2, I'll let you know. So, well, today in our webinar, Christian, we alternate every week, and one leads, one contributes, and Christian's leading this week. And so in the webinar this week, we're going to talk about how to know if candidates are politically viable. First of all, we're going to do our headlines of the week, but after that, Christian's going to talk about how we know if they're a good fit for the district, how we determine their pathway to victory, what emphasis we put on fundraising, and then how do we evaluate the work they're doing, and how it all comes together to determine if a candidate is politically viable. And then at the end, we'll take question and answer. And for those that know, there's a button at the bottom of the Zoom that has Q&A. That's where you enter your questions. And please continue to do that throughout the presentation. If something comes to mind, enter it, so that when we get to the end in 30 to 40 minutes, we're ready to go and we can get right to your questions. And with that, Christian, take us off. What's that?
Yeah, another thing to note, there's going to be polls. So there's going to be polls here that we want everyone to participate in. Make sure to cast your ballot. So you'll see them show up on your screen, but we'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on things.
Absolutely.
So what I found interesting this week is that my home state of California is now finally catching up with the times and has decided to go to be 100% vote by mail this fall. There's two reasons I'm very, very excited about this. One, I'm a nerd and I love vote by mail, mainly because it increases voter turnout. In states that have vote by mail, we see some of the highest participations when it comes to voting. And so I'm excited for that fact. The second fact that I'm excited about this and why I find it so interesting is that I am very curious on how everyone going to be a vote by mail participant is going to impact people's voter turnout scores. There's a number of data houses out there that does voter turnout, that does modeling and scores. And one of the things that really increase someone's score is if they vote by mail, just because we all know if you vote by mail, the likelihood of you participating is a lot higher. So what I'm really curious to find out is, how is this going to impact, mail vendors, digital vendors, consultants, and also like the data scientists? How are they going to weigh this when it comes to this upcoming election? Because we're already anticipating historic turnout. And in the state of California, where it took us 2 months to count out of our ballots, increase that by like 10%, 12%, who knows? It's going to really throw a wrench into a lot of data turnout models. Mm-hmm. But for us on this call, this is going to have a huge impact on lower level races. So we're talking municipal races, school board, state legislative races. These are races that people don't do the research on, likely skip it. But now they're going to have a ballot in their home for near 4 weeks, which means they have 4 weeks to do some research, to get information and name ID up there. So this is going to have a huge impact on people's viability and electability. What's your thought on voter turnout when it comes to vote by mail, John?
Yeah, why don't you throw the poll up? People can answer the question here as I go. I think what I'm really curious to see is the states that automatically send ballots to everyone, and the states that require absentee ballot requests. So they send out the absentee ballot requests first. I'm curious about see how the difference is there. Also, I think people need to remember that Colorado, what's shown us is that a lot of people still vote at the end. And unfortunately, we don't know, as political operatives, we don't know, because there's no track record in most states, who votes early, who waits in the middle, who votes at the end. But that's something that to me is interesting about Colorado. How many people, I think in the last election, like 40% of people voted on election day still.
Yeah, there's two things that are really interesting. One is I saw an amazing vote by mail push while I was in Florida. So I worked in Florida on the presidential election, and the opposite party spent just like hundreds of thousands of dollars on getting seniors to vote by mail, to register to vote by mail. And they sent countless of mail pieces and just sign-ups in the mail, and it increased voter turnout, vote by mail significantly by double digits. And so I wonder if there's going to be a push for that this year because of COVID, because, part of the CARES Act includes getting money to state secretaries of states to push this. So I'm interested in if that's going to be the new normal here. So like I said, I'm a geek about it. And so I'm going to end the poll now and share the results. It looks like most people think that there's going to be somewhere between 20 and 25% increase in voter turnout, which is astronomical. I think
it's high. I think it's moving like 10%. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. If I had to decide, I think 10%. And I, like I said, there's already anticipated to be record turnout in this election. So I would, if I was doing the back of the envelope math, I would increase it by 10 to 12%, somewhere in that area.
Well, we'll know in California pretty soon, right?
Well, so Jonathan, what did you find interesting this week?
So it was an article from Wisconsin Examiner, which is more of like kind of a lean left online publication. But this is a real practical article about what people are doing with COVID-19 and grassroots politics. And the article talks mostly on the Democratic side of the aisle about what they had to do when the coronavirus work limited their ability to do grassroots organizing. And my big takeaway from this article is just, folks, you got to continue. You have to pivot. You can't get frustrated because you can't do door to door. Door to door is never going to go away. That is the most foundational part of most campaigns. But you have to get on the phone. You have to have, you have teletown halls. You have to have video town halls. You got to use text messaging. You have to do some friend-to-friend peer networking for candidates. So you have to pivot. You can still utilize your grassroots activists. It just has to be a little different. And who knows? I don't know. I'm not going to guess where we're going to be by the fall with door-to-door. Maybe it'll resume or not. But I think there are lessons that are going to be learned from this time period that will stick with us forever because we're all being forced to try it, and so therefore a lot of innovation is going to happen. So I'm watching closely at how grassroots political operatives change their tactics over the next several months.
Yeah, I think this is interesting. So we'll show the poll right now, but the next thing we want to talk about is text messaging. So I've seen a lot of presidential primary candidates use text messaging a lot to get, whether it's volunteers, dollars, or just public support. So I'm interested in seeing how that is going to continue to evolve. Because my theory is that text messaging at a certain point, even in this cycle, is going to hit a saturation point where it's no longer effective. The open rates will decrease and the click-through rates will decrease. But to your point, people need to evolve. And I think this is the time to shine for us fellow millennial avocado toast eaters to shine. I think elected officials really should be looking to the quote unquote influencers on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, because they have a model, whether it's the right model or not, it's at least a building block to how to engage the public. And that's one thing that a lot of local elected officials are going to struggle with, especially down ballot, is how to engage with people if you can't be having town hall meetings, you can't go down to the Rotary Club and things of that nature. So I think this is going to be a really interesting dynamic that's going to change the way we do politics for the future.
Gotcha. Agreed. Good deal.
All right. And so my polling isn't working, but we will keep.
Okay, I'm sorry. You mean I didn't know it wasn't working. All right, let me throw the poll up for everybody here. Poll number 2. Okay, yeah, poll number 2 was, have you ever taken an action because you received a text message? So that's part of what we know. We all get, that's one part of this grassroots campaign. A lot of texting is going on. And we're curious, are you paying attention to those?
Yeah, I just had a conversation with Elizabeth Warren's director of texting. And what he shared with me is that there's no more effective method to get people to volunteer for a shift than through text messaging. It wasn't so effective to persuade. It wasn't used at all for persuasion. It was horrible, he said. But to get people to volunteer was the main thing to do.
Good to know.
All right. So we're going to end this poll and share the results here. So I guess text banking is vital. 38.
Yeah. Look at the ones though. I mean, it's donation and volunteering, and that's what's, so when I say visit a candidate website, those are people who probably were curious about someone they didn't know about. But the top 2 were things that people, they were already engaged in the candidate, and then they were moved to some sort of action, volunteering or donating. So
yeah, I think I've donated via text message. So it's worked on me. I've been a sucker and got fooled by it. All right. So we'll get started here on this week's session. So we're going to figure out how to determine if a candidate is viable. So I want to start with a disclaimer. There's 3 things I want to share here. One is, in an ideal world, you will have research and polling to be the foundation of whether or not a candidate is viable. But in some of these races, especially the smaller the race or the less attention they have, polling and research will come at a point where it might be too late for you to operationalize an effective independent expenditure or decide whether or not the candidate is right for you. So I want everyone to know that if you have polling and research available to you, that should be your building block. But this is going to be a progression of an organization that might not have the resources to pay for that or have it directly available to them for a number of reasons. The second thing I want to hit here is you'll see as we go through each of these things you should research that there's no silver bullet. There isn't a perfect equation that tells you whether or not a candidate is viable. There's factors that go into it, but there's not one silver bullet. And the next thing I want to make sure people know is that we're going to go from the very simple things that you can research yourself by going to Wikipedia or your state secretary's website, and it's going to become more and more complex, which requires more resources, but also more analyzing on your end. So I want to make sure everyone understands that. So the first thing we're going to ask ourselves when we're looking at a candidate's viability is, are they a good fit for your district? So the first question you got to ask is, what does your district look like? There's 2 main things you want to look for when we're hitting this subject. The first is, what's the demographics? Is the candidate that you want to support or the candidates that are running, are they reflective of the community? The second thing is party affiliation. These are the two basic building blocks that are really going to tell you from the get-go of the viability of a candidate. So is the candidate's party an asset or a liability? So,
Christian, one thing I was going to add here. One thing when I think about this topic, obviously last week we did how we know if a candidate's with us on the issues. One comparison I like to make to this topic is the Final Four. When we all fill out our brackets, we pick who we think is going to be the winner. And invariably, if you're very loyal to your alma mater, you get blinded and you pick your Western North Central State University to beat Duke in the Final Four. I mean, we have this irrational view of things that we care about. And I think, what we're trying to do is help people be objective and ask questions like this so that you fill out a Final Four bracket that actually is probably likely
to win. Yeah, no, I think that's important to know, because the first section, there's going to be candidates you're just going to fall in love with. And the greener you are at this, the easier it is to fall in love with a candidate, because you're like, that's the embodiment of what I want representing our community. And to your point, you shouldn't pick, Western Central University to go over Duke.
I was very careful not to pick a specific university.
As a big Duke fan, I just never bet against Duke.
There you go.
So I used East Los Angeles as an example. So I want to direct your eyes from left to right. So if you go all the way to the right, you'll see that 98% of this area of Los Angeles identifies as Latino or Hispanic. And so if I'm running the candidate and I pick someone who's Latino, did that give me a shoe-in to win the city council seat here? Because 98% of the population is reflective of the community. Well, the answer there is no, right? Like as I said, there's no silver bullet. So just being a Latino in the Latino community doesn't set you up for success. And so, because the other thing, there's a number of dynamics that go into here. Are they Mexican American? Are they Salvadoran American? Are they Guatemalan American? Or are they Mexican, but also the president of their local MAGA club, right? So there's a number of factors that factor into it. So demographics alone aren't the be all end all, but they do matter. And so one thing I also want to note is that as you're looking at some of these state senate races or city council races or school board races, you'll see that there's sometimes like a district that is, has somewhere between like a 15 to 25% population of one ethnicity. But you have to do the research and find out whether or not like that seat has been designated like the historical Latino district, right? It's carved out in the area to make sure that there's fair representation on the council. And this is something we're seeing more and more of. So that's just a bit of insight that you have to really take the time to do the research into the local politics of everything.
Yeah, this obviously is really important, and every person in politics is looking at this kind of information when they're deciding whether to support a candidate. I also think things like how they fit the culture of the district. So I live in Nebraska, someone that comes from New York, they might technically, quote unquote, look like me, but they don't maybe match the culture, or they don't reflect the issues. So demographic, there's a lot of things going on there about that we have to look at. So it's pivotal. It's really the first question you should ask.
I personally would love someone with a heavy Brooklyn accent to go and do a town hall in Nebraska, but that's just for my entertainment.
I can't think of anyone else who's done it, but yeah, go for it.
The other thing is, like, what does your district look like in terms of voter registration? So this is the state of California. So you'll see there's nearly about 20 million people registered in the state of California, and 43% of them are Democrats. Republicans make up about 24% of the state. And you see that actually the second largest party in California is what we call no party preference, what is typically known as independent. And so when you're looking at numbers like this, there's nearly a 20% split between Democrats and Republicans. That's about 4 million votes. So Jonathan, when you're looking at a state like this and someone tells you, I want to get involved in a statewide race, under what circumstances would you ever get behind a party that has about a 4 million vote deficit?
Wow. There's probably only two scenarios. One is a lot of discontent with the party in power, which happens in every state. People go through cycles, and there's either they're just frustrated or there's a specific event that occurred. A very damaged incumbent who could make it through a primary, because primary voters tend to be loyal. That's something else I would look for. And then, just the home run candidate, but home run candidates are so rare. So really it comes down to the discontent and a really troubled incumbent.
Right. Yeah. So when you're looking at numbers like this, like you said, like there has to be something huge that happens that makes people really dissatisfied with their party. And so when you have numbers like this, what you're going to find is results like this. So this is the governor's race. Those numbers were from 2018. This is the 2018 governor's race here, where you saw about a 3 million vote split between Democrat and Republican, where our governor Gavin Newsom won handedly here. And so when you're looking at these numbers, the other thing you have to factor in is party affiliation. John Cox was not an all-star candidate, but even if the Republicans did have an all-star candidate, there would have to be so much that goes in favor of Republicans to make this even a viable seat, a competitive seat. Mm-hmm. But again, going to the question that I asked, is party affiliation enough in a state that has a big majority like that? No, right? Like, so this is the example of Maryland. Maryland is actually more Democratic than California. They have a 2-to-1 majority over Republicans. And then in 2018, they just elected a Republican governor by a large margin, by 12 points. And this goes to show that, again, just because you have the right party affiliation, just because you're reflective of the community, isn't the equation you need to guarantee victory. There's a number of reasons this happens.
One thing I was thinking for this topic, I see a lot of this party affiliation variability more in gubernatorial races or state executive like level races where people are looking for leadership. Like there's maybe more involved in that issue versus down ballot races. I see it much less common. So like you see the Larry Hogan become governor of Maryland. I would say in the state, there's probably very few legislative districts that have that same phenomenon. So there's something different about gubernatorial races that allows some variability.
Yeah, I completely agree on that point. And so the next question we want to know, if we got to ask ourselves, so we've looked at what the district looks like. Now we're going to ask ourselves, is this seat even competitive? Is there a chance that this seat was up for grabs? So the first question you got to ask is there a pathway to victory? And the way you determine that are like two main things you have to research. So the first is going to be recent election results. And the next is you have to look into whether it's an open seat or a contested seat. So you're going to begin by looking at election results. You're going to look at the margin of victory. So look at the most recent election and look at the margin of victory. This sometimes will tell you whether or not a seat is competitive or not. Jonathan, would you say there's a rule of thumb that you follow that if you see a race is either X percentage within winning, you're really interested in getting involved, or is there even a number that's too high that you say that people just should stay away from?
Yeah, you know, in some of the really big swing years, like 1994, I don't know, 2010, this last election, 2018, some of these rules of thumb maybe go out the window a little bit, but I like to see above 60, and then I would say, boy, why are we even messing? Why are we even trying to challenge an incumbent or try to elect a candidate that doesn't reflect the base demographics of a district if their opponents are getting 60+%? That, you know, there's no rhyme or reason exactly to that number, but that's, in my mind, a 10-point swing would be pretty hard.
Yeah, and to your previous point, right, like we don't typically see those swings when it comes to municipal or really state-led races. That kind of a swing has to say something has radically changed in the public sentiment or in the district. So that's the other thing we want to look at is, so look at the most recent election results. If it's, you know, within 1 to like 5 percentage points of being a win or loss, you know, you might take that into consideration. But you also want to look at previous elections. Is this a district that constantly flips back and forth between parties? Is it a district that is always close? So you want to look at those numbers and seeing if there's a trend. Is there a trend in voter participation going up? Is there one going down? It varies from state to state. I know in Los Angeles, we're starting to see an uptick in voter participation, where in Denver, we're kind of seeing a downtick in voter participation when it comes to municipal elections. And so the other question, there's 3 other main questions you have to ask. Has there been a major change in demographics in that district? Do you anticipate a massive turnout, a change in turnout, whether it increase or turnout? And has the party affiliation swung? You know, there's a lot of districts that went from red to blue this last cycle, and that might also impact lower ticket races. And the perfect example of that is, the other thing we want to find out is an open seat versus incumbent. And so this is a broad statement, but it's a rule of thumb is that open seats provide an easier pathway to victory than one that is held by an incumbent. Jonathan, what was the stat you shared last week about Jersey?
Well, I can't remember it exactly, but I did some research on Jersey elections, and an incumbent hadn't lost a legislative primary in 3 or 4 cycles. So,
Yeah.
so hard.
And I think the stats were pretty accurate for Congress too. If we go back like a decade or two, like incumbents just had like a 90% winning rate. So incumbents are really hard to beat. There's a number of factors that go into that like we can spend a full 30 minutes on itself. So I won't get into that, but just know an open seat is an easier pathway to victory. But if you do want to take on an incumbent, the questions you have to ask are the same ones you're asking about your candidate. And that also says, are they a good fit for this district? And, a perfect example of someone that fell victim to this is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's seat. There's multiple reasons why she won, but one of them is that the person who held the seat was no longer reflective of the community. The community had shifted, it had become much more working class, much more diverse. And so factored in, a candidate that's really excited and hungry and outworks you, married with a district that radically changes and doesn't look like you, makes you a very vulnerable incumbent, regardless of how much money you've raised or whether or not you're in leadership in the House. So it's not to say that to beat an incumbent is impossible, but you do need, almost a perfect storm and the perfect candidate that's willing to work to get them out of office. And so when you're thinking about incumbents, like in what makes them vulnerable, so when we talk about changing demographics, this is another one. Has public sentiment really shifted? This is a headline about how Republicans who are running for re-election in the Senate are worried about Donald Trump's ratings right now because they are essentially locked in with him to make sure they get reelected. And so you have to figure out whether or not public sentiment has changed with the party that's in favor right now. Do people love them? Do people hate them? I've seen cities and states go through phases where they're like, I love my representative, to, the very next cycle, let's throw all the bums out. I hate everyone in office. Jonathan, how would you recommend people figure out where the public sentiment is? Is it just a gut feeling? Is it polling? Where do you get this insight from?
Yeah, it's a lot of gut feelings, but I'd like to look at national polling, because there's a lot of national polling on moods, and that usually can tell you where people are on issues and what issues that are important to them, and also how the partisan shifts might be happening that could affect some of these down ballot races. Obviously, nonpartisan races are a little different, but I think national polling usually can give you a pretty good glimpse, and you can look at it closely enough to apply it to your local situation.
I totally agree. And usually they're free and readily available to people to take up. So, which isn't also true of state. So I want to kind of pressure test everyone. So feel free to join in the chat box. So here's an election. We see that the person won by nearly, 50 points here. And so this seat is up for re-election. So off its bat, Jonathan, would you say this is a seat that you would want to take on the incumbent who just won by 50 points?
Don't think I would.
Right, doesn't look grim. So let me give you some more information, and everyone feel free to chime in if you would get involved in this race or you'd sit this race out. So let's say you want to take on this incumbent. And so this election result was from a special election where 60% of the people who turned out were white. The district itself, though, is 80% Latino. The new challenger is a Latina, and this election is going to be held on Super Tuesday here in California. So you have a Latina candidate taking on an incumbent in a district that's over 80% Latino, and it's going to be on a high turnout day of Super Tuesday where everyone gets to vote for the presidential candidate. Would that rate make you re-examine this election?
Well, I just threw the poll up. We'll let people chime in and see what they think. Would they, based on those demographic issues, I think that, yeah, that's a race you would. There's enough change going on that I'd want to take a look at that. And it looks like we got mostly yeses, some don't knows, a no, but for the most part, people are saying yes. That based on how you describe those circumstances, they would take a harder look. And it's a great example where you can't just look at the service level. Like the 71% is a really good number, but you have to look at other variables as well.
Yeah. And for that sake, as you noted, most people said yes to this question. And I think, yes, based on that surface level information, this should make you re-examine this race. And then you're going to get into we're going to talk about a few more things you should look into, but on the surface, yeah, this is a race you should consider. Obviously you'd want to take polling, you'd want to do research, so on and so forth, but on the surface, that's a great way to think about when you're looking at these elections. So the next thing I want to talk about is fundraising. This is usually the truth teller whether or not a candidate is viable for a number of reasons, because candidates hate fundraising. They despise it with everything in them. And so it really is considered the quote unquote work of the issue. So I want to share this headline. It talks about that Vice President Joe Biden has raised nearly $47 million in the month of March. And on surface level, that looks great. That's a lot of money. But if you look even the sub headline, that he lagged significantly behind Donald Trump's massive war chest. And the reason I'm sharing this is because fundraising is relative. It is all relative. It depends on how many voters you need to communicate to. It depends on what your opponent's raising. It depends on if there's going to be outside factors like independent expenditures for or against you. All this is relative. So when you're looking at fundraising, there's data out there that will tell you whether or not someone's on the right track. But we're getting into the landscape where it takes a little analysis on your end to figure out whether or not someone's on the right path or not. And so when you're looking at fundraising, there's a few things you want to look at. So the first I want to start with is looking at historical fundraising figures. There's usually a price tag that it takes to communicate to voters in a district, because every district's different, every turnout is different, and the means of communication might vary from district to district. We talked about at the early set of this presentation, we talked about digital, investing in digital. If you have a more senior community, you might have to invest more in mail versus digital versus door knocking. So that's going to play a factor into this. And so the one thing you have to ask the candidates you're looking at is, are they willing to match or exceed this number? I can't tell you the amount of times where our membership have said, I love Jonathan. Jonathan's the best. He's going to be the best voice for young people on the school board. But he thinks that money is toxic. He doesn't believe money should be involved in politics. So what he's going to do is just go around and talk to people on the bus for the next 6 weeks. And that's how he's going to win elections, which is very common. People hate raising money. And if the candidate's refusing to raise money, I want them to explain to me how they expect to get their name and their message out to the public in order to win their vote. So this is one of the real hard-hitting questions that you have to be honest with the candidate. And if you're a membership organization like we are, it's something to make sure that your members understand that it's going to require hard work to get there. The other thing is, do they have a pathway to raising money? Jonathan, were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah, if you finished up, I have a comment.
Yeah, just do they have a pathway to raising money? So I've had candidates tell me, yeah, I know it's going to take $250,000 to be competitive in this race, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to work day in, day out. And then when you ask them how they plan to get there, they really don't know. They say, I'm going to rely on $3 and $5 donations, but my network is only 80 people deep. And so you got to make sure that even if someone's ambitious enough, that they have a pathway to get there.
Yeah, Christian focused a lot on the importance of having dollars to run an effective campaign, which I definitely agree with. I also look at fundraising as another question of viability, which Christian's going to get to here in a little bit, which has to do with local support and likability. I think there's some cynicism about donations that they normally go to people because folks want to do access buying. And that's not what I see generally. Generally, candidates get money because people like them, because they agree with them. And so if I see a candidate with a lot of money, I see they're working hard. I see people support them. I see people like them. To me, that tells me it's a good candidate. They're a good candidate. And I look and see who's giving. Is it a bunch of PACs that are out of state or in the capital, or are they local people giving? So I like to look at fundraising from that perspective as well.
That's what I call the Marco Rubio line of talking about fundraising. That's the framing he used when he accepted money from the NRA. He said, they bought into my philosophy. And sadly, I agree with him. As much as I have my own opinions on Marco Rubio, I think you're absolutely right. I think it shows whether you're viable, if people like you, if you're doing the work. I think a perfect example of that is Senator Sanders. There's a reason why he would be able to raise people, and because there's a lot of local support in the state. So another thing is what's their fundraising plan? So another question that people don't know to ask is who's on their campaign committee team? Campaign committee teams are cabinet kitchen cabinet teams, whatever they may be called. Every candidate has one. It's usually filled with like either one policy people or community leaders there that really help them shape and navigate their policy, but also how to navigate in the space of that community. And the other one is usually people who have networks that can host fundraisers or can cut checks themselves. And I typically look if the candidate has a campaign committee team first and foremost, and the second thing is like who's making it up. If there's someone that can fundraise for them. The other thing is like, are they dialing for dollars, and also do they have fundraisers planned? If they don't have these things already in motion, it really does raise a red flag for me. But the only thing that could be a saving grace is there's a lot of candidates out there that can and are willing to self-fundraise. So that's another thing to see if someone's viable. Are they willing to cut themselves a check for $200,000-$300,000 to be competitive, whatever it may be? So those are the questions I like to ask when it comes to fundraising. And we get to the last one. So this is the one where it takes a lot more analysis on it. Is your candidate likable? Likable can mean a million different things to a million different people, but it really does matter whether or not your candidate's likable, because that's going to mean whether or not they're going to get a lot of support. And so there's two ways to make an analysis on this. First is on local support, and second is on endorsement. So local support, here's just a few people I want to like specifically name drop that you should be having conversations with and asking them for their insights and thoughts on your candidate. I've been known to give candidates like a list of people, like go talk to these people and try to get their endorsement. What it does is it shows me whether they can willing to do the work and go out into the community and get public support, but it also gives me a measurement of to rate them by, because I can go and say, Jonathan, what did you think of Frank? Did you like him? Did you not like him? What did you like about him? And so these are like some of the most important ones. So your political partners, who are the partners that you have, whether they're in the same sector or different sector out there that you really respect and admire and have a good pulse on things. Ideally, they have a slightly different perspective on you, because it's really easy for us to really be living in a bubble. So you want to pick someone who might disagree with you on some issues to get their insights. The other ones are party leaders and party donors. Quite frankly, if a candidate is in the good graces of the leadership and of donors, that's just going to mean many more resources, whether that's door knockers, whether that's mailers, whether that's volunteers, or simply dollars. It's going to have a huge factor. The opposite is true too. If you're a candidate and the party just hates you, the local county chair of the blank club doesn't like you, there's going to be ramifications to that as well. And lastly, but also just as important, maybe even more important, what do community leaders think about this? Community leaders can look like activists. They can look like faith leaders. They can look like, civic servants. But people are out there, whether they work at the YMCA or head of a church, these are the people that really are respected and people look to give them advice on local issues like state senator, state house, municipal races. So these are the people you should really invest in talking to. And then lastly, endorsements. Endorsements are a huge thing, but I do want to warn people, different endorsements trigger different engagement. It can look at something as expensive as an independent expenditure from a club. It can look like volunteers, or it can simply be like they give you permission to use their logo. I've had a number of situations where people have come to me and say, Christian, like I got endorsed by Planned Parenthood. And I'm like, great, you're running for school board though. And, they don't have a chapter in your district. How does this going to translate to you? And so you really want to do the research and homework to know what endorsements matter in your district. For example, here in Los Angeles, in one part of the district, there's no stronger endorsement than the one of SEIU. And if you just go a few miles south, there's no endorsement stronger than the Longshoremen's endorsement. So it really does matter who's endorsing you, because it does come with resources, but it also does come with like name ID and value alignment. So you want to make sure you know those, but also you want to make sure that the candidate knows that, and that's where they're investing their energy, because that's what's going to make them viable. The last thing I want to share with people is like, make yourself an endorsement calendar, especially if this is like your first or second forte into getting involved in elections. You don't necessarily want to be the first ones to endorse, especially if you can only contribute, $10,000 or $5,000 to a candidate, independent expenditure, or directly to them when you're heading up against, $500,000. So what you want to do is make sure that you're building coalitions. One way to do that is make an endorsement calendar. Find out when organizations and institutions are making their endorsements, and make sure that yours falls in line, whether it's in the middle, at the tail end of it. That gives you enough resources to know whether or not your candidate is viable. Because again, you can fall in love with a candidate, and if they lose every major endorsement in that district and can't fundraise, it doesn't really make sense for you to get involved yourself in a candidate that's likely to lose.
And Christian, as we come to the end of the presentation here, let's do one last question for everybody, because the best endorsement of all is my front yard, Christian. My front yard. We want to know on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being not important and 5 being really important, how important is candidate or yard signs to candidate viability? And Christian, I know you have a strong opinion on this.
I have very strong opinions, but I'm going to keep them because people are taking to this pretty hard. The numbers are jumping all around here. So as I see it slowing down, I think 70% of people have voted already. So if you haven't voted, please do. I think yard signs are as effective as me shouting out my name out my window.
Wow. See, I don't think they're a 5, but I think they're a 3 because they do tell me hard work. They do set sort of the like peer neighborhood, peer kind of thing. Like, oh, my friend has a sign up. And I will tell you as a candidate, when I drive down through town and I see my sign there, I'm like, oh, all right, let's go. All right. It gets me fired up. And then when I see the opponent sign, it fires me up like, oh, that makes me mad. I got to go work that street. So maybe it's just for a candidate's sanity more than anything. I don't know.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. I think it does show whether or not community support is there with you. It shows whether or not you're doing the work in your community, so that random neighbors are willing to put your name up in their yard. That being said, is that did it have like a effect outside of that household, right? I think no. I think it might measure enthusiasm, and that's a different conversation. But I just think that. Give whatever money you're gonna spend on yard signs, give me that money and I'll get you some more door knockers and we'll get you some more votes.
My yard's very valuable for my endorsement, but that's fine, Christian, if you want to take a pass. All right.
Yeah, I've had a number of candidates get mad at me because I haven't ordered them yard signs or I haven't let them buy yard signs. All right, as we're wrapping up here, again, I started with this, I'm gonna end with this. Again, this is the most complex part, this is the most expensive part. You wanna do research, opposition research or just regular research on the candidate. And for those who don't know what this is, you usually hire a firm and they'll do a basic, what we consider like a background check. Or have they been arrested? Do they have any tax liens? Do they own any property? Just things that are out there in the public sector that are readily available. But they'll also do things like social media scans. Have they been problematic on the internet? How many internet accounts do they have for Twitter or Facebook? Do they have any burner accounts? So that costs money, but it will also tell you if there's skeletons in the closet that you really need to be concerned about. The other thing is polling. This is, again, foundational to getting people elected. And it's expensive. So it can be as inexpensive as like $10,000 and goes up to like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And it's incredibly, incredibly expensive. But there's 2 ways you can get this for cheap or for free. One is sign up for a candidate's email address. Candidates will readily share their internal polling with supporters and donors because that is a fundraising tactic. If you can show that you're viable or if you can show that you're likely to win, it usually gets you more money. So that's one way. The second way is partners might have it, whether it's the state party or the county party or public sector unions or private sector unions or just some of your partners in the spaces. They will have polling and, laws are different, so check with their lawyers. But usually polling is available within electoral coalitions. Again, this usually is a foundation. I put it at the tail end because this does require resources and a great deal of resources. Everything else, it's a simple Google search, but this is vital to everything. So, Jonathan, we have a candidate. They took your interview. They did the questionnaire. They got an A+ on it. We looked at they're viable. Not only are they an institution in their community, they're lovable, they shake hands, they kiss babies, and they just love fundraising. Is this the point where we just signed a blank check over to them?
Yeah, it sounds like our perfect candidate. In fact, I think let's buy some Los Angeles television. Let's mail everyone in the state. Let's let them know about it. But you know what? There's a problem with that.
Oh, what's that?
Groups like ours, people who are doing issue-based politics, they don't have the bottomless budget to spend on candidates. Sometimes you have to find ways to help candidates that you support in more economical ways. So we're going to talk next week about how to be a little more affordable, but still make an impact on behalf of candidates. And with that, we're going to go to question and answer, and appreciate everyone. We're a little over 5 minutes, but we appreciate you all bearing with us. Hope that was helpful. And for those that can stay on, we're going to dig into the questions here. So first question, polling and research makes sense for statewide races, but are they worth it for local races? Christian, what do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think you need to know whether or not a candidate's viable. Unfortunately, school board races are becoming increasingly more expensive to participate in, and you need that North Star. Obviously, you want to be economical and reasonable, but even baseline polling to find out whether a seat is viable is a first good start, especially in school board races that are nonpartisan. It's really hard to gauge things, so polling is really useful in there.
Yeah, and research you can do yourself if you can't afford it. And I would say polling depends on how much you're going to spend in the race, whether polling makes sense. If you're only going to spend $5,000, then you wouldn't do a poll. But if you're going to spend 50, you would do a poll. So, all right. Another question is, what are your thoughts on candidate viability in low information, nonpartisan, low turnout races beyond demographic characteristics? And I'll go first on that one. I would say because candidates don't have a letter by their name that signals something to voters, I think I'm looking at how hard are they going to work? Are they showing me stuff? And then how well do I think that their message reverberates with where the public is at the moment? Those are the two things I'm looking at.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much more than that, right? Like, I think, yeah, I wouldn't add much more than that. I think because of low information, because of those things, and I think this kind of aligned with another question we have here about special elections, is like, this is really where you have to rely on public sentiment, because when it comes to low information, nonpartisan races, they're really similar to almost special elections, which is, where is the public right now in this moment? And I think we have a few examples of that, with local races where you see very low participation number and they just follow whoever's been in party before. And we've also seen the opposite, like the special election in Alabama, which was like this freak case where the public sentiment was against, the party in charge. So I think public sentiment really does factor into like those two races, special elections and low ID name races.
Gotcha. Christian, we have someone asking about, someone's asking, as we embark upon absentee ballots, in some places it's been difficult to get info, probably I'm guessing about how many people are requesting it, how many people are voting. Any advice for someone who wants to acquire that information in this new climate?
Yes. Harass the Secretary of State, harass the county clerk. They're actually, I've done it in about 5 different states where I've had a really good relationship with the county clerk, but it goes a long way to be polite and persistent, especially with these county clerks and secretaries of state, calling them and building a relationship with them. They're just as geeky about it as you are, if not more so. And so they're happy to share that information if you build a honest and respectable relationship. But I would say persistently follow up with them because a lot of times, especially in this day and age, people are going to be flying blind. They're not going to know when there's going to be a system set up to share this information publicly. So just be persistent.
Yeah, and I think in some cases it's just not going to happen. The local election commission's not going to have up-to-date information because they're not prepared for it. So that's just something you have to be realistic. But I agree, like 9 times out of 10, you need to be the one who's understanding of their plight, who's relating to them. Boy, what a mess. I know, make them like feel sympathy for you. And then 1 out of 10, you might have to play hardball. And that's where you bring in other elected officials, maybe county elected officials who oversee the department and demand the information, or newspaper reporters that can inquire about, hey, why isn't this information getting out? So there are other things that you could do if you need to play hardball.
This is where campaign attorneys come in real handy.
Exactly. All right. Let's see. What about special elections? Is there anything different about candidate viability in special elections?
I just go, what is the public sentiment at the moment? I think that's going to be your foundational thing. If you have money to do polling, obviously start there. But public sentiment on special elections, it's gonna follow that trend, I would say.
And usually you can look back at a special election and see what types of voters turn out more frequently. So
Right.
I spend a lot of time looking at historical information. Not that you don't in a normal election, but I would spend a lot of time on it. But yeah, but who's fired up? That matters too. Like who's motivated enough to come out and vote. Let's see. I think the last question we have is following up, I think, on the last point when we were talking about nonpartisan races. What do you look for in a candidate to assess their ability to shift public sentiment?
That's a great question. Yeah. So obviously the higher the ticket, the higher they are on the ballot, the more likely they are to change public sentiment. I would say like a governor has a lot of influence on how public sentiment is seen because one, they got a majority of the state to agree with them and agree on their vision forward. So I would say someone at that level has a great power to do so. And obviously it decreases as you go down the ballot. I don't think you know that until they're in power, to be quite frank. I don't know who has, I don't know if anyone expected AOC to be AOC when she was running for Congress. Even if you were a big admirer of her running for Congress, the chances that a freshman congressperson would have the impact that she's had, I don't know who would have betted on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I generally think candidates. I always usually think elections are not the time to shift public sentiment. That's when you react to public sentiment, and it's outside of elections that you shift it, which politicians can do after an election. But I don't try to run against the wave in an election. That doesn't.
I love that. I love that. You should make that into a bumper sticker because I think people view it the other way. I think people view elections like this is our moment to pivot and talk about X issue. And that's what really sets you up for a loss. And I think it takes a lot of experience not to do that and not change the wave. But elections are really to repeat back to what the public is telling you.
And you should be true to your issue. I mean, believe me, be true to your issue. Don't change what you believe, but you might approach it a little differently because of what people are discussing, or you might just be realistic. Like, hey, listen, I know I'm not going to convince people to, I really want to have chickens in my community, which we don't have. This isn't the election for me to raise the chicken issue. Sometimes you just have to be realistic, but I think that the wave of the public is too big. So yeah, I think we're wrapped up here, Christian.
Actually, we got one more question. So do we have any general numbers on vote by mail as it pertains to race, gender, and age? No, I would imagine. So broadly speaking, older voters are the ones who register to vote by mail. We have seen a trend in some states where parties are really focusing on vote by mail. So in battleground states where there's universities, so North Carolina is a perfect example, and Florida is another good example. There is kind of a history of getting college students to vote by mail, but it's not widely popular accepted. I think we're going to see that change in this coming public, but I think if you can share the importance of vote by mail with your community, it's a really easy argument to make, and it will increase turnout.
My gut is the turnout will go up, but the turnout percentages will be the same by demographic. That's my PTI pick the Super Bowl champion prediction, and I will not bring it up if it's wrong. But if we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it.
We are woefully over time, but at least we definitely want to get you out in this hour. So we cannot thank you enough for all the engagement and questions. For all those who are new this week, thank you. Please join us next week, sign up for the next week, and share this far and wide with whoever you might be able to benefit from this. And if you have any questions or topics we didn't cover or we didn't go deep enough, share it with us. We're hoping to make this longer than 6 weeks, but we can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here with us and engage us in these conversations.
All right. Thanks, Christian.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.